Phenotopia Awakening. This was a game that was sent to me on Steam, and it was one that was on my wish list, mainly because I pretty much put anything I think looks interesting on there, which would explain why I've got over like 2,000 titles on that wish list. But this was sent to me, and it looked really interesting, sort of a combination of puzzle and non-linear platformer, although it is actually significantly more linear than this game would initially have you believe. My feelings on this game are very complicated, and I can't say I've really experienced this with any other game. On the macro scale, I think this is a good game, and I want to say that before anything else. But if I were to actually summarize my feelings and experience playing this game, it would be best described as death by 1,000 paper cuts. Every single individual solitary moment of this game, I found something that was actively bugging me, detracting from the experience, and making me dislike this game. Honestly, I can't find a moment off the top of my head where I was actively enjoying myself and having fun because something, one or two tiny little things were interfering with my enjoyment of this game, and it really did the game as a whole. It makes me really hard to say I have a positive opinion about this, even though I do think at its core it is a good game. The story starts off in a Nier-esque fashion, taking place far before the start of the actual game, where the world was far more advanced than it is in the present. There's a huge war, humanity was destroying itself. Well, basically they had to be saved by this mystical, legendary weapon known as the Phoenix that kind of saved everything. Fast forward into the future and everything's all pastoral and stuff. The game stars a character named Gale. She has to go to a nearby ruin in the middle of the forest to find her friends who have run off. She does so and learns that they're looking for a meteorite that crash landed in the ruins. They even give you a little slingshot to go and explore and activate switches, to which the entire ruin basically tutorializes more platforming and how to utilize your new ranged attack in an effective manner. It's a pretty solid little intro, but the game doesn't even start until you're done this. Upon retrieving the shooting star and returning to your friends, you learn that your entire village has been kidnapped by aliens from space. And so you have to leave your village to the tiny little children to take care of themselves so that you can find help, find the rest of the villagers and their, by extension, family, because they're all orphans, because of course they are, and maybe discover the truth behind the Phoenix. The story itself is actually pretty cool. I gotta admit, the whole going exploring these pastoral villages and then suddenly space aliens kind of came out of nowhere. I kind of appreciated that though, and they work it in pretty well. Although they do sort of drop the whole villager and what happened to them after a while, which is weird, because without spoiling too much, there's kind of another thing going on that kind of takes the front seat. Let's just put it that way. The plot itself is decently paced, and the characters themselves don't really grow or change over the course of the story. Not significantly, anyway. In fact, there's kind of weird moments where there feels like there's built-in character regression. Like, at one point you meet an old friend of yours, and it turns out you have to help her because she's kind of in captivity. And when you are given a challenge that puts you in a very dangerous situation that you have to complete in order to save her, you go and tell her, don't worry, it'll be fine. She doesn't believe you. And you're actually given a dialogue choice as to what to say with her, but it's a choice between not telling her what you're going to go do and put your life on the line for her, or you can just say, don't worry, I got this. Which is sidestepping the question entirely. It feels like your character has regressions in their built-in character based around these dialogue lack of choices, which is kind of weird. The writing itself is actually pretty on point though. There are some genuinely really funny moments in the game. There's an entire sort of small branch of the main quest which involves a secret society that ended up basically being a giant shaggy dog tail, which was funny. The piece of writing that really stands out to me was just this one completely unremarkable character sitting in a bar. He fancies himself something of a food critic and recommends the ketchup because it pairs well with the French fries. And that had me laughing for way too long. That is probably the most remarkable bit of storytelling in this, is just this one random not quite food critic, and that was just so funny to me. The writing is definitely on point. It drops the ball here and there. I think the characters could be better developed. I think Gale could be a better established character because there's really not as much there as there really could be. She's more effectively an avatar than a character in her own right, I think. But the story itself is good, the writing is solid, and it's definitely worthwhile as a story. The gameplay itself is where this game starts falling apart rather quickly though. At the start, before you even begin, you have to select your difficulty, in which you are shown a series of sets of stars. to delineate difficulty. I can assume 1 star means easy and 5 stars means hardest, but what does that actually mean? Does each star equate to some sort of like health and damage exponential growth in enemies or something? Does it make their AI harder? Well, no. The thing is, you have to select the set of stars you want to go with for your difficulty before the game will even tell you what you're selecting, which is just badly designed. But when you select whatever star set you want, it then tells you, okay, well, these are the combat assists that you're going to deal with. So basically, each one of these is a pre-made set of assists and handicaps to help you through various combat challenges. Why not just say that at the start? And why do they have to be set to these various star systems? Why can't I pick and choose what combat assistances I want? And spoilers, you can. For some reason at the start of the game, they just group them together in this ill-defined star system. Later on, you can just go into the menu and turn on and off whatever combat assists you want. And I will tell you, at the start of the game, I had 0 combat assists. By the time I was done, I had them all on just because combat is really not fun in this game at all. But yeah, while the difficulty has options, it's initially told to you in the most obtuse manner you can imagine. And like, there's no point in them doing it this way because they literally do it better 5 seconds later in the option menu. It's weird to just drop all this ill-defined information on your players. Phenotopia's game takes place in 3 sort of separate phases. You have the combat phase, the explorative phase, and the puzzle phase. And I guess we'll start with the worst and move to the best, and kick things off with combat, because combat in this game is absolutely atrocious. Gale, her weapon of choice is a baseball bat with the tiniest hitbox that attacks directly in front of her, and that's about it. I feel like combat's a bit of an afterthought here because fighting enemies in this game is really quite tricky. Standard land-based enemies and even bosses have very wonky hitboxes. Can just pull out certain attacks on a whim. Some don't have a lot of wind-up or tells that they're going to be doing these attacks, and it's really hard to react to some of them. You don't really have any defensive options. Not really. You have a bit of a dodge roll that is kind of the entire repertoire of defensive abilities, but it's very uncontrollable. You just sort of fling yourself in one direction at a set distance, and that's sort of what you've got. But your dodge roll requires you to use 2-button inputs, which, when you're dealing with quick action, is wildly inconvenient. One of the very first bosses I fought was a big slime that has a whip attack that basically covers the entire field. I could not figure out a safe spot with this attack, so I tried dodging around it using the dodge roll, which would have probably worked, except that it can pull it out on a dime, and the fact is I have to react using 2 buttons as opposed to 1. It's an extra split second to input, and that split second could be the difference between you surviving and taking damage and dying. It's not fantastic to utilize your sole defensive option as a 2-button input when everything else is a 1-button input. It's inconvenient and it makes everything feel very sloppy. Likewise, every single attack in this game has a delay, so if you want to sit here and swing your bat at your opponents, you're going to actually have to like take a moment between every single attack before you can do it again. If you're attacking and you want to dodge, you better hope you have the time between those to actually do so, because the game's not going to give you the time to wait around. It's not fun. Every single attack in this game is beholden to a stamina meter, and honestly, they could axe the entire stamina meter in this game and it would feel a lot smoother and quicker, especially if they got rid of those weird delays. And while you can kind of get rid of the stamina meter insofar as that you can take away its effect on your standard attack, so you can just swing for the hills, which is what I ended up doing to make combat at least somewhat palatable, it's still not fun. Even just using your little slingshot to do ranged attacks and interact with physics things in order to damage enemies or even take part in mini games or puzzles will drain stamina, which on top of the delays makes it really inconvenient to use, even if you're not in combat. And there's no way to deal with this, again, because everything's beholden to the stamina meter, and removing stamina meter requirements only affects your standard attack. So even utilizing like your little ranged attack is really inconvenient, even in the most casual moments, like doing mini games and stuff. There's additional weapons you can get, like a bow, which I assume is better than the slingshot, but I would never know, because everything in this game costs way too much, and there's way too little money everywhere. You'll frequently be met with a bat upgrade, a dress upgrade, which is basically more defensive armor, a bow, and usually some other trinket to the side. But you'll also be met with needing to buy like lamps in order to actually environmentally traverse caves and stuff. There's frequently other objects such as a fishing rod, which you need, I assume, for some sort of side quest involving making money. But again, I wouldn't know. I had to make a choice between doing more damage, trying to take less damage, or being able to just advance the plot because everything is so expensive and money does not drop frequently. Occasionally you'll find shops that have the same stock but at different prices. There's one person that had a broken lamp that would, I guess, supposedly shock you if you used it, but I bought the more expensive one that just worked because I needed it at the time and I had just enough money. There seemed to be like this entire really cool like side quest thing, but before you could even join it, you had to buy a license, which I couldn't afford because if I bought that, I wouldn't be equipped to handle any enemies ahead of me. And that was me shirking defense because I didn't have the luxury of buying both attack and defense. They throw several upgrades at you at once, and the enemies kind of require you to have them, but they don't give you the money to, you know, splurge and grab everything. You get like one of them. And if side quests are tied behind this money proposition, well, you're going to end up skipping those side quests entirely, even if they are probably the greatest generation of money in the game. It's a weird stepping stone that just blocks everything ahead of you. And because this ultimately affects how you're equipped and how you fight, it drags down combat immensely. I never got the bow, which might have been the better ranged weapon. I don't know. But I can tell you ranged combat in this game is miserable because you're completely planted in place when you have to use your slingshot. You have to sort of calculate an arc between you and your opponent, which, and this might shock you, is probably moving, so, you know, being stuck in place and having to generate an arc to shoot your slingshot just kind of doesn't gel right. If you ever have to fight a flying enemy, which basically requires a ranged attack, that is just pure hate in game form. The only way I could ever effectively take these guys out, because using a ranged attack on a moving flying target is basically impossible, was to try and get them smushed up against a wall so that they dip down so that I could jump, so I could smack them with my bat. That's just what this game taught me I had to do. In order to actually fight bosses, because they could be so unpredictable, they did so much damage, the most optimal way I could find to actually fight them was basically to stand inside them, hope I could survive using, like, healing items, face tank it, and just swing for the hills. And yeah, that'll work. It's probably not the way this game wants you to play it, but it's the most efficient way I found to play it because nothing else really worked all that well, and everything else ended up getting me killed faster. Later on, you'll run into enemies that can just teleport around, and you basically just have to chase them around the room hoping that they'll die, or hoping that there's an environmental thing that will kill them. And sure, it's cool that there are environmental puzzles that can interact with enemies and stuff, and it's cool to see that this world is built in sort of a believable way using neat physics systems, but those neat physics systems are a lot less neat when everything kind of doesn't work properly, or you die before you get to use them, or the enemy teleports away before you can smack them. There's just so much here that's just so unbelievably frustrating in a very, very simple package. And it sucks, because the fact is, combat kind of sort of works, but it's just unpleasant in every way, shape, or form, because more and more as you go across the game, you are presented with more and more combat challenges, and more flying enemies, and things that are just unpleasant to deal with, that you're just forced to because you don't have any other options. You need to deal with this. And of course you're under-equipped, so have fun with that, unless you want to go try and grind money, which money drops are very, very few and far between. Enemies do drop items, but they're items that you use in cooking so that you can make healing items, and those drops are really the only reason you want to get into fights. So in theory, at least, if you're not taking damage, you don't need those cooking items. You don't need to actually fight anything unless you're in a locked room, which does happen from time to time. There is a place where you can sell used items, you know, it's a place where you pawn off all your junk, but it actually gets introduced pretty late in the game. Like, I had all these, like, minerals and stuff taking up physical space in my backpack that I had to get rid of other items I could have used because I was told, oh, this is valuable, I can sell it. Okay, where do I sell it? Well, you can't actually sell it until you get to like the third city, by which point your backpack is already just so filled with crap that you've had to get rid of actual treasure or things that would keep you alive, just because they're not conveniently spacing out these places where you can sell things, and you can't just sell things at regular shops. It's baffling that they designed it this way. Enemies can do incredible amounts of damage very quickly and can juggle you, which sucks to find, but yeah, you can just pinball around rooms dying before you even really got a chance to fight back. There are so many baffling choices about how this game was made in terms of combat, and it's whenever combat's involved, and it becomes increasingly more and more as time goes on, it is just unpleasant and miserable. Like, it works in a very loose sense, but I think this entire system could probably stand to be reworked or outright removed. Which I guess leads us to the puzzles, which are a step up from the combat a fair bit, but they have a lot of issues as well. I think by and large the puzzles in this game were probably the focus, as opposed to combat, which feels very, very tacked on and not well implemented. But while the puzzles are by and large are okay, there are a few that just seem kind of weird. I appreciate that the puzzles seem to have, I don't know if they were designed to be handled in a specific way and I just found a different way, but there are seemingly ways to use valid unintended solutions. Unfortunately, finding those unintended solutions meant that I was probably getting frustrated with how I was expected to deal with it too, which is kind of the drawback there. I remember one room in this tower. This tower was like the bane of my existence, and the moment I wanted to just stop playing, because at this point and afterwards it was just miserable. But there was this one room where you had to hit a switch to activate some time-sensitive platforms, jump up to the top of the room, activate a door before the platforms disappear, and then jump through. What you're supposed to do is hit the switch, drop a bomb that should allow it to, when the switch turns off, turn back on again to get through. I was so unbelievably frustrated with timing, and timing in this game is awful when it comes to puzzles, that I just jumped on my way up there. It took about 50 attempts, but there's just enough of a window to do it without having to reset the switch, which is good because timing the explosion to all that is just extra nonsense that doesn't really work. There is one puzzle that requires you to, using a spawner, spawn a couple of crates on top of each other, one at a time, on a moving platform. And the spawner doesn't do it instantaneously. You actually have to time the moving platform with the time it takes the spawner to actually generate the boxes on top of each other. That was awful, and it wasn't like a hard puzzle or anything. I knew what I had to do. It's just the timing in these puzzles is just really, really bad. Several times I found puzzles where you had to like stack two boxes on top of each other and then just shove the bottom box a little bit, jump up, shove the top box a little bit, because they're not physically connected and they don't work with the same physics. So if you push the bottom one too far, the top one will fall off. So you just had to slowly readjust over and over. Oh, you're getting close to the wall. You better jump over the boxes. Instead of pulling, you have to start pushing until you get them to the wall. It was just very slow and fiddly, and it wasn't even really a puzzle. There was no thought process put into this. And maybe my solution was unintended or something, but it felt very underwhelming and just, we're going to take up as much time as possible to do this very simple thing in the slowest, most excruciating way you could imagine. And the worst of the puzzles, absolutely worst, was when the puzzle itself didn't explain its own mechanics to me. See, back in that terrible tower, this was where I really got stuck. I was stuck on this one puzzle for about 2 hours. So here's what you're supposed to do. You're supposed to run into a room and you're locked off. You see a little switch, so you hit the switch and that will retract a platform which will open the door. While that platform retracts, a pot will fall from the sky and hit the switch, which should, at least by design, teach the player that the pot falling onto the switch will activate the switch a second time, forcing you to hit the switch again to really hammer home that you got the message so that you can move on. That works great on paper, except it didn't work. They didn't design this exposition of mechanics in such a way that it's actually like a controlled environment. And I can tell you this because when that pot fell and was going to show me that it activates switches, my character was in the way and I got clocked on the head. I didn't learn that dropping a pot on a switch would actually work. Now, I actually naturally intuited this, but as a fun little problem, when I actually tried to show my work to see if this would actually work to solve a problem in the next room, it didn't. This game was actively telling me that the proper solution to its own puzzle that it was trying to teach me was wrong, and that what I had to do was effectively the same thing, but interact with a thing the game was actively hiding in a retracted wall. I'm sorry, I'm willing to accept that I'm a stupid person who doesn't understand puzzles, but that is bad puzzle design. See, I went to an optional area that was like the room next door that has basically the same puzzle. You're supposed to drop a pot on a switch so that you can run around the entire environment, have the pot drop on the switch so you can walk through a door. And then you get a health buff, which is great, except that I couldn't really see a platform that was supposed to retract because it was already retracted into the wall. All I saw was there's like this green colored thing in the wall and I couldn't figure out what that was. I had a solution for this though, because I have a spear that if I throw it into the wall, it sticks there, and if I throw another one, it disappears. So what I did was throw the spear into the wall and place a pot on it above the platform. I ran to the door, threw my spear to make my previous spear disappear, the pot fell, and the switch didn't trigger at all. Even though I did not get the mechanics of the room, I had intuited the puzzle properly and was told that was wrong, which is not actually accurate because that's how you're supposed to do it, sort of. You're supposed to use the retracting platforms, not your spear, but the end result at least should be the same. But it doesn't. And what's better is the pot, which was required to actually advance that room, was stuck. I couldn't get it out of this little rampy crevice it was stuck in. Fortunately, I could respawn the room and get another one, but that's just awful. And the fact that the game actively told me that what I was doing, which was what it was asking me, was wrong because I just used the wrong platform. A platform that it hid from me because it was already retracted in the wall. And this was just an optional, we want to make sure you know what this is, so let's see you do this to get the fun little treat. The actual puzzle you have to deal with, back in the previous room, requires you to do this basically in triplicate because there's now 3 doors you have to pass. You have to get a mobile switch to carry with you to activate the door once, you have to drop the pot on a thing to activate it a second time, and you had to activate the switch to begin with to have it in a preset configuration that would actually work. But because I was shown that the pot falling on the switch didn't work, I was stuck. I couldn't figure out what I was supposed to do. That's not clever puzzle design, that's actively obfuscating the mechanics and the solution from the player. You are actively deceiving and lying to the player about what you're supposed to do in this room, even when they get the solution right. And I'm sorry, but that's bad design. Now, in this game's defense, I have actually just been showing off the absolute worst of the puzzles. These are my examples of the things that most frustrate me about the puzzle design. But there are some genuinely inspirational puzzles here as well. Early on, you learn that this game is very proud of its physics system and will use its physics system in conjunction with puzzles to be the solution. You have to use your slingshot to shoot a little berry off a tree to drop onto a switch. That's clever, that's utilizing the game's systems, and it works. And it doesn't involve shoving boxes incrementally around a room until you get to where you need to go. There's even some adventure game puzzles in here. At one point, you get your friend's ID to go to a bar so that you can get something for another character, but you don't look like her. So you have to go and get your hair dyed so you look a little bit more like her. That's clever! That's cute! More like that, please. That is a puzzle I can get behind and I love. There are some genuinely quite clever puzzles here, but it feels like they're just stuck behind so many tiny little incremental and unremarkable puzzles, or downright frustrating ones. And it sucks, because you can clearly see that there was some really clever thought put into these, and genuinely fun, inspirational puzzle designs when this game really wants to get going. The exploration in Phenotopia, I think, is the high point. Every town has tons of little nooks and crannies where you can find upgrades, power-ups, and little bits of treasure here and there. There's a bunch of different side quests as well, which is encouraging to help further your interest in exploration. When you get out into the world map, this game decides to channel its inner adventure of Link and have like weird semi-random encounters that spawn directly around your character and wander around. If you ignore them long enough, a red one will appear and just start chasing you. If you run into one of these, you just go into sort of a flat 2D area and fight some things and then leave. It's kind of a weird and unnecessary addition to the game, but each map has a lot of different little secret areas in it. The initial map has like 5 secret areas that each have a like upgrade in it, which is pretty cool. The starting dungeon that you're in, which is, you know, a short little tutorial dungeon to teach you how to use the slingshot, you can finish it in like 15 minutes. It is a lot bigger than that. Just have to come back with more power-ups later on. It's not like full-on Metroid-style non-linear platforming or anything, but it would behoove you to visit previous areas with a greater inventory to expand your explorative abilities and see what else you can find, because there is a fair bit to find. I did notice one issue with the environmental exploration, however, and it hit me really hard when I got to like the first real town of the game. It was really hard to tell what was a platform and what wasn't because there's so much detail crammed into the visuals here. Like, it looks beautiful, but sometimes the actual like tactile information that's given to the player is a little bit garbled, and it's just hard to tell what I need to do and what I can jump on. And it actually becomes a bit of a gameplay issue when you're given parkour challenges to run through a certain set of rings in X period of time when you're only got X amount of stamina to do it in, so you can barely do it then. It's just a little bit too much visual information that could probably stand to be simplified. Overall, I think that the exploration to Phenotopia is probably its biggest asset, and I think that while it is a bit of a mishmash that does have some issues, it is at its core a fun game. It's just, like I said at the start, every step of the way, every single solitary moment, I was just getting annoyed with tons of little things that just wouldn't ever get fixed. Between the stamina and weird delay between everything in combat and the lack of any sort of defensive options, and the puzzles sometimes just being mundane and boring time sinks rather than something interesting. You know, it really sucks because you do see the high points, the fun exploration, the intricate map design, the really interesting areas and chunks of the world and all the different people within it. And when the puzzles are on their A game, they're actually quite a lot of fun. The problem is that every step of the way, it just kind of goes out of its way to bug you about it, or at least me, certainly. And that's why it's really awkward to try and talk about how I feel about this gameplay-wise, because I do think it's a good game. It's just, I can't think of a moment where I was actively having fun with it. And it felt like it was going out of its way to be less fun than it could be every moment I played. Now, the presentation to Phenotopia Awakening is tremendous. The cutscenes look beautiful. The environments and characters are really well detailed. I love the visual style for the actual characters themselves. Like, they're very, very simplified, but there's enough personality there that you can tell each and every one of them apart. It's very, very, very well done, and it complements the writing very well. The visuals and the environments are tremendous. Like I said, there's a little bit of issue figuring out what is a platform and what isn't from time to time, but I will say that the visuals themselves are gorgeous. And the audio is tremendous. The soundtrack is really quite good and leads to a very, very beautiful package. Now, if you want a copy of Phenotopia Awakening on Steam, it is available for $22. And at that price, I would say wait for it to go on sale if you're interested in this, because like I said at the top, this game is, I think, very, very good. But there's so many little things that drag it down that I think, you know, if it was tightened up in terms of combat so that there wasn't such a huge delay between everything, and they axed the terrible stamina system, they gave you some more defensive options, they made ranged combat not awful, you know, if the puzzles were a bit more consistent with their quality, I would be more ready to recommend this. But it is an interesting world. It's a tremendous story with excellent writing, and I want to explore this world. I want to play around with it. I want to see more games in this sort of world and see where this world goes. But the way this game has been executed, like every step of the way, it's like pulling teeth to have fun. And it sucks because I can see the effort and I can see the quality here, and it's just a lot of little things pretty much every single solitary moment that will drag it down. And because of that, I cannot recommend this at full price. In fact, I'm struggling to recommend it at all just because of all the little things that are dragging it down. It's really hard for me to summarize my feelings in this game and whether or not I can recommend it, because I see problems with the combat, I see problems with the puzzles, and those are the two biggest aspects of this game. And yet, I still see the effort, and I still see a very quality experience here. I think if you get this game on sale and you're willing to put up with a few obnoxious things that will never really go away, you might enjoy Phenotopia. But as it stands, I'm not sure I can recommend this. This one is definitely one where all the small little issues kind of overshadowed the quality of this one.